Hello, my name is Peas. I have made a couple of mods, and I'm a 3D modeler and animator in Blender. You might know me from such famous mods as Minecraft Pickaxe for Monster Hunter World, Minecraft Pickaxe for Monster Hunter Rise, Minecraft Pickaxe for Monster Hunter Wild. This tutorial is going to be an explanation of how to import, edit, export, and put a mod into Wilds, specifically doing an armor mod. I'm not going to go over getting the plugins to work or Blender inputs or anything. I use the old inputs, so my inputs wouldn't be helpful to the majority of people anyway. But we will get started. So what we're going to do first is we're going to open the asset browser. I'm going to go over here, Monster Hunter Wilds asset browser. Going to go to mail. And since I've already modded it once, we're going to be using the alloy body mail to mail. Gonna murder the default queue real quick, as is required by law. Import our body. And now we've got it in. So you can see now that it's in, we've got the master collection, which has the ID of our mesh here, which will be very important. We've got our actual mesh file, which has our armature in it, and below it are all of our mesh files. And then we've got our materials down here. So what I'm going to do is really quick, I'm just going to make a placeholder mesh, nothing fancy, just to show the process and how it goes. Okay, so messy placeholder just for representation. So now that we have our custom mesh, whether you modeled it yourself or you imported it, we are ready to get started with parenting your custom mesh to the armature. One important thing you want to make sure, you want to see that your origin, which is the dot, is always at the center of the project, not in the middle of your model or anything. That could cause some problems with weight painting and moving the object when it's in the game. So now that we've got our custom model set up, we're going to start the process of moving it over into the actual model information. So the things that we need to do for that are weight painting for the armature, naming the mesh, naming the vertex data, and setting the parent correctly. So first what we're going to do is we're going to set up the vertex weight paint data. So basically that is just what dictates what parts of the mesh are moved by what bones in the armature. So from the L4 arm here, you would be able to see that it's moving the rest of these bones. So this would be weight painted to about this area here. One important thing about doing your weight paints and such is that anything that has this extra RY, HJ, HJ, for the most part it's HJ stuff, those are all twist bones. They're used for like slight adjustments during animations. These are not going to be the main moving parts of your model. Those are mostly additional. You want to be focusing mostly on the ones that are just forearm, hand, spine 0, spine 1. Those are going to be your main movers. So for the sake of making this tutorial easy and understandable, I'm just going to parent my entire mesh to one bone just to show that it works. But you can mess with your weight paints how you see fit. What I'm going to do is select my object, then select my armature. Then I'm going to do Control P to set parent. And we're going to set the parent to armature deform with empty groups. So what this is going to do is if you go over into the vertex data here, you see all of the bones now have vertex data assigned to this model. You want to make sure that you have all of those bones assigned to the model, even if they're not going to use them. It's important for the game to load the model. If you don't have it, the game could hitch, crash, not load. So it's important to have all of them. So since I'm going to parent everything to just one bone, I'm going to use spine 1. Just going to assign all those there. In our modifiers tab, you can see that we have our armature set up. So this will be moving with the armature. See if I can actually manage to get spine 1 here. Yeah, so you can see my custom mesh behind the original one is moving with the armature. So now what we have to do is we've got to move our custom mesh to be under this mesh collection.
Awesome. So this is also a reason why I chose
to use Armor for this, because this is kind of an extra case that you might not have with some other stuff. Occasionally, models will have more meshes in them than what you're going to be replacing. So what I mean by that is I have one mesh here that I'm going to be putting in, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meshes in this group. Now, we don't need to keep all of those meshes. You can put in just one mesh and be fine, but you have to make sure that you're keeping track of what you got rid of and what you replaced. So what I do is what I'm going to replace, I put 0 underscore, and then the things I'm going to get rid of, I put dashes. Just to make it easier for myself. And then I'm also going to do the same for vertex data for each. Awesome. So now all of those are designated as the originals, so I know what I'm getting rid of and what I'm not. So now we need to rename our custom mesh to be the name of one of the meshes in this tree. I don't think it particularly matters which one it is in terms of getting it to actually display in the game, but currently as of the making of this, there is no way to modify textures. So for right now, basically choosing your object is going to be choosing the material you want to use. I always use this use SC just as a baseline. So that's what we're going to be doing. Again, you can do any of them really, but there's a later step that you're going to have to keep in mind if you're going to deviate from what I'm doing here. So I'm going to copy the whole name outside of my indicator there and rename my custom mesh to that name. And then I'm going to do the same for that mesh's vertex data. And you need to make sure that you change the names of these here so that these names don't have, like, I believe Blender does something like that. When you have a duplicate, you want to make sure that the names are not duplicated. Your custom mesh needs to have the original name. So now that that's set up, we can start on removing data that we don't need for this mod, because I just want my custom mesh to show up here. So what I do is I create an additional collection that's just going to be my trash heap. And all of the stuff that I'm not using, I pull out and move into this trash pile. Now, you will see that they are still parented under this collection, which we do not want. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into each of these extra pieces that we don't need, go into the object properties, relations, and remove the parent to the armature. Okay, great. So that's the mesh setup. Now there's one extra thing that we need to do since we have less meshes than we do materials here. If you have materials in here that are not going to have a mesh to point to, your mod's not going to work. So since we're using this body use SC, this is the only material that we need to keep in our MDF collection. So I'm going to grab all of the extra ones, move them down into our trash pile. And now I will make that invisible so we can see our mod. Now, the last thing to do with materials is to make sure that your custom mesh is using the same material as the object you replaced. So since I did the body use SC, I'll go to the body use SC, right here. This is the material it's using. Copy it, go up to our custom mesh, search for it, assign it. And it's just beautiful. Don't you love it? Now that all of that is set up, we can start getting moving on actually exporting it and putting it in our game. So this is the point where the mesh ID is going to come in handy. So we're going to pull up our Monster Hunter Wilds list file, which shows the file pathing for everything in the game. And we're going to need to recreate that file path for our mod. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to search, and I already have it typed in here. It's just CHO2O100002 mesh. I'm going to search for it. And we have it right here. So this right here is our file path. So we're going to have to recreate that. So I've got a blank folder here. And now we're going to start recreating that file path. So we're going to do new folder, natives, new folder, STM, new folder, art, new folder, model, new folder, character. We're just copying this path right here. New folder, CH2, new folder 010, new folder 000, and new folder 2. Okay, so now that we have that set up, we'll be ready to export our model into that path. So we're going to come back into Blender, File, Export, Mesh Editor, RE Mesh, and then I just copied and pasted that file path we just made. So now to export our mesh, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we have the right mesh collection selected. If you have, multiple imported models, like let's say that you put the entire armor set in here of the alloy armor, you're going to have several of these mesh collections. So make sure that you chose the one that you're working on, which is the only one that we have, so we are, and we're going to export. Now, a common problem that I have had with the exporter is that sometimes it doesn't like to export out of this collection. A way that I've gotten around that is I grab all of this under the collection, move it into the scene collection, go back to our export, and then uncheck the mesh collection, and then hit selected objects only, and that should work. It hasn't been a problem as much recently, but I have ran into that problem in the past. So now our mesh is exported. Now we got to export our MDF file. So we're going to go back down, export, mesh editor, materials. We're going to go back to that same file path. And now that we're in that same file path, we're going to export our MDF file. Now we're almost done. There's one last thing to do. So for models in Monster Hunter, there are 2 file locations for the actual mesh file. One is under the file path we just made, and then there's one more that's under a streaming file path, which we can find right here. So it's basically the same path, except once you get into, we'll go back to the top. So you're going to be in natives and then STM. You've got this art file, and then you're also going to need to add a streaming file. And to make it easier on myself, I just take the art folder, which has everything we just exported, go into the streaming folder, and then paste it, because it's the same path. Now there's one thing we need to do since we pasted it, is that the MDF files do not exist under the streaming folder file extension. So we're just going to keep the mesh, and we're going to delete the MDF out of our streaming folder. So now we're ready to actually set this up as a mod and get going. So we're going to go to our natives folder, which this should be the folder that you turn into your mod zip. I'm going to use WinRAR and archive, and then make it a zip. And I'm going to name it Shardugi And this is our mod now. So we're going to copy that mod, and then we're going to go over into our Fluffy mod manager. We're going to go to options, open mods folder, and we're going to paste our new mod. And then we go back to mod list, refresh, and our mod is right here. Now you need to make sure if you haven't used mods at all before, you install RE Framework, open the game, and in the RE Framework settings, you turn on loose file loading, and then you hit insert to close the menu and save that option, and then you can come and do the stuff we're about to do right now. Otherwise, it won't load and your game will break. So now that we've got our mod in here, RE Framework set up, we're going to turn our mod on. We're going to launch the game. One helpful thing about doing Armor mods is that we don't even need to play the game to see if it works. Thankfully, the loading screen just has your character on it, and we can see if it worked. And there we go. We've got the head of a hunter and the heart of a Roblox character. But I hope this tutorial was helpful. If you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer if and when I can. And happy modding.